My name is Anthony Moreau. I am the CEO of American Eagle Gold, and with me I have our VPX, Mark Bradley, who is working on our flagship asset, the Golden Trend. Now, one of the reasons we are doing these 5-minute, 10-minute vignettes is to help educate the public, help educate our investors. Some of the nuances of the exploration business, some things you see in news releases, you may never know what it means, but it does mean a lot in terms of our exploration program. And while we still want to educate the public and our investors, I think it'll help them better understand exactly what we are doing and why we are doing it. So, Mark, thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Now, Mark, there's drilling. People are always looking for drilling. They want to see what's your grade per tons. How are your drill holes? But the non-sexy part of exploration is a lot of the front end work. Now, can you maybe explain to the listeners why front end exploration is so important, and what portion of your exploration budget you typically put into front end exploration as opposed to your drilling?
Yeah, I think, well, the rationale for front-end exploration is pretty simple. I think most people recognize exploration is inherently risky. I mean, it's usually, let's face it, the odds are against you, and everybody's aware that the majority of exploration projects don't result in a discovery. And so the object, and drilling is expensive. I mean, and it is the most expensive part of your program for sure. Addressing the second part of your question first, I would say anywhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of your an exploration project budget is usually dedicated to the drilling part, because it is expensive for drilling and assays. All the rest of it that's involved, road construction, pad construction, everything goes into it. So obviously what you would like to do up front is to try and decrease your risk as much as possible, or at least improve your odds of finding something earlier rather than later. And the way to do that, of course, is with putting in work on the surface up front. In some cases where you have outcrop, you're lucky you have outcrop, you have exposures, you can do a lot of surface mapping, sampling, identify your structures, kind of key in on drill targets pretty easily that way. The challenge we have in Cortez area is that most of the targets are undercover. They're under thick pediment gravels, they're under volcanic rocks, they're under unmineralized upper plate rocks, they're covering up the good lower plate rocks. So the challenge there is to try and figure out a way to look through this cover, to try and come up with some definition through cover without having to resort to just drilling holes higgledy-piggledy to try and get an answer. So the techniques we tend to focus on are indirect, and that means geophysics. We use geophysical surveys to approximate the kind of rock packages we may be looking at, the kind of structures we may be looking at. Do we see the kind of structural architecture that is required to be able to host a large Carlin-type gold system? And so that's the purpose behind the front-end exploration program, to improve your odds that the holes you drill in the first round will result in significant good information coming out.
My dad's been investing in the junior mining market for longer than I've been alive. He still didn't understand the front end exploration. Mark, I spoke to you the other night. The best way I was able to explain to him is MT. You're essentially measuring electric and magnetic signals, and it helps you understand the type of rock that you have. Mm-hmm. While seismic, you're measuring sounds. It helps you understand the structure of the rock. Am I on the right page there?
Yeah, basically. I mean, the MT, what the MT survey is designed to do, you're looking at the electrical characteristics of the rock, either using the natural sources in the Earth's crust, or in the case of controlled source CSAMT, which is controlled source magnetotelluric, you're inducing a current, you're putting a current in the ground, and you're measuring the ground's response. And so some rocks are more conductive, they carry current well. Some rocks are more resistant, they don't tend to carry current. And in our neck of the woods, the upper plate rocks, our cover tends to be more conductive than the lower plate carbonate rocks. They tend to be resistive. So hopefully using CSMT or MT, you get a feeling for, okay, where's our conductive unit, where are resistive units, and that may help give you an idea of how deep you have to go to find the favorable rocks. And it may help define certain high-angle structures as well. Looking at the difference in response, you can see offsets in the electrical signature, which helps identify might be some structure coming through there. Seismic, as you point out, yeah, you're basically looking at reflectance. You're you're impacting the ground either with a thumper or an explosive charge. You're sending shock waves or waves through the ground, and they're getting reflected by surfaces at depth. And the surface could be structure, maybe a thrust fault blowing the structure that's reflecting it, or it could be bedding planes or bedding related structures in the rock, and they'll reflect back. And so the seismic won't tell you what kind of rock you're looking at, but it could tell you, okay, what's the form of this rock? Is there a fold there? Are there low angle structures coming through there? Do we see the kind of structures that we would like to see in order to host a giant ore body?
So to sum things up, MT helps you understand what type of rocks are there. Seismic helps you understand the structure.
Exactly.
And you're really spending the money on the front end exploration to make sure that you don't waste money on the back end for the drilling where you are using that to drill mineralization.
Exactly. You want to make sure, one, that you actually have a target that looks right, and two, you're drilling in the right area to hit that target. So that the whole point, just reduce some of the unknowns and avoid wasting money drilling scattershot holes that don't have much hope of hitting anything. So
now, you mentioned earlier that it's a challenge, and I want to remind the investors again, where there are challenges, there are opportunities. That's why we have the Golden Trend. That's why we have you at the helm, Mark. You helped discover Gold Rush, which is an undercover deposit. It's world-class. It's just north of us. It's 15 million ounces. That's why we have you in charge of the front-end exploration and the drilling program. One thing I want to try to explain to investors and get them out of a custom of always seeing grams per ton. Now, when you do a drilling program, we want to understand the structure of the rock underneath, the architecture of it. So can you maybe explain a little bit more about lower plate rocks and why it's a success at first, just hitting those to try and understand the deposit?
Yeah. So if you look at all the giant deposits in the Cortez Trend, and for that matter, the giant deposits on the Carlin Trend, they're all hosted in carbonate rock. And these are rocks that were formed in the old continental slope shelf environment that existed on the western side of North America back 400 or 500 million years ago. And they're, for whatever, there are a variety of chemical reasons, other reasons, that these rocks are favorable to host gold mineralization. And you want to be able to figure out where they are, how deep they are, and be able to get through the upper plate cover or whatever cover you have in order to get into those favorable horizons. It's really critical. And I think Golden Trend, one thing to note is that even though there were three or four deep holes drilled there, none of them reached the lower plate. They all ended up in the upper plate rocks. So the lower plate rocks at Golden Trend, we're pretty confident they're there. It's in the Cortez window, so we know they're there, but they have never been drill tested. No one's ever gotten down to them.
One thing is interesting to say that in the history of the Golden Trend, which is over 2,000 acres, there's only ever been four drill holes over 1,000 feet. Only two of them are diamond drill holes where you can actually properly understand what the rock is like. And none of those have been drilled after 2009 when the Gold Rush deposit was made. Gold Rush is that deposit, 15 million ounces just north of us. So can you let the audience, what has changed in terms of understanding the geology since 2009, which, by the way, there have been no deep drill holes at our property since then?
Yeah, I think, well, important to realize that in 2009, people were still hesitant to drill deep holes, and deep holes being 1,500 feet or deeper, because it was so, well, you're gonna have to find something great, really spectacular to do that. Well, Cortez Hills was pretty spectacular in that the lower zone is definitely deeper than that, and it's got really good grades. Gold Rush, the bulk of the mineralization maybe say 12 or 1,500 feet deep, which is pretty deep. But then you go to the north in your 4 mile, you're drilling over 2,500 feet of upper lake rock. So, but you're still hitting, you're getting the kind of system that it's okay if it's that deep because you got enough grade to carry the mine there. So I think people are, since 2009, people are a lot less scared of the deeper drilling than they were back then. People, if you drilled a 2,000 foot hole in 2009, people, how can you justify that? It's incredibly deep. Now you're drilling 4,000 foot holes at 4 mile. Okay, yeah, guess the geology just looks good there. So we recognize that the right geological conditions can exist a lot deeper than we were looking for in the past. And you can still have a good opportunity to make a pretty damn good deposit, even at that depth. Well,
Mark, thank you for helping to educate the public and our investors. We are very happy and lucky to have the Golden Trend. We're happy to have you at the helm, someone with experience actually discovering a world-class deposit in the area. And we have every faith that we'll be able to find this deposit on the Golden Trend and help create a lot of shareholder value. So thank you very much, Mark, for joining me. And thank you for all the listeners for tuning in.